My guest on our Hangout today is Garner. Aaron is the director of the Emotional Intelligence Academy. Welcome, Aaron. It's lovely to talk to you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for inviting me.
So, Aaron, start us off by telling us exactly what the Emotional Intelligence Academy does and why it exists.
Okay, we set up an Emotional Intelligence Academy primarily to get behavioural sciences that can be applied to people that deal with people to them. Unfortunately, the behavioural sciences, when it comes to looking at people's behaviour, looking at people's emotional awareness, a lot of that kind of science was held back and only really taught to people that were in law enforcement and FBI and security services. So we wanted a lot of the science to A, continue, which is part of what we do, and B, get it out to everybody that could use the science, whether that's emotional awareness or in the credibility and deception sector as well.
Well, I've called today's Hangout "Would You Lie to Me?" and is that the primary reason that you do this? Is it to detect deception?
That is part of it. Whenever you're dealing with people, you're dealing with people and their emotions and their stories, essentially. And we all talk to each other, no doubt. Sometimes there's deception involved. Most cases, they're white lies, and that doesn't really faze many of us. However, there are times where there's high-stakes situations, for example, in HR, in recruitment, for example, where those situations can be more high stakes, and it's important then. It's not the key part of what we do. We really want to talk about emotional awareness and deception detection as well. So some of the area we're looking at is also in schooling as well. We believe that emotional intelligence, emotional awareness and emotional skills should be part of the core curriculum with reading, writing and arithmetic. So.
Okay, so well, let's start there. So, how do you think that could work in schools? How would it enhance someone's experience at school?
Okay, so I think it's very easy, not just for children but for adults as well, to become frustrated when you don't understand where somebody is during a conversation or an altercation in the playground, for example, and for children to have a better understanding of their own emotions and simple strategies that they can use to help them control those emotions and understand other children's emotions, as well as teachers, parents, friends and family as well, stands them in good stead for the rest of their life. And it's something that's not hugely taught in schools. There is some areas where they teach social emotional learning, predominantly in the US they've started doing it, but it's not looked at very closely here. So that's one thing that we like to look at here.
Okay, so translating that into the business world, you mentioned HR and recruitment. Let's have a look at how it could affect things there. So, would it typically be used in an interview situation, or is it like some of the psychometric tests, something that someone would do on their own and then be assessed afterwards?
So yeah, in HR, it can be used in various different ways. So from general management and HR. Building constructive relationships is a big part of business, whether you're at the sales end or whether you're managing or you're recruiting. So understanding people and understanding yourself and managing those relationships constructively can be used throughout business. But obviously in recruitment, there is a higher chance of deception being prevalent in an interview situation, for example. So yes, there's understanding of yourself in an interview situation, understanding how you're affecting the interview, understand how you're affecting the behavior of the person you're interviewing and why they might be behaving in a certain way. But obviously, if you're hiring executive level CEOs and those kinds of things, then the stakes are quite high to get it right. So deception, detecting that is quite important in a business context.
So in your agency, are your clients mostly business people, or are they law enforcement, customs people, that kind of thing?
So I've personally done training in large Middle Eastern airlines. So the security staff there or crew members. So we deal with large corporations and other security organisations, fuel companies, oil companies, and things in the past in the Middle East. But we've also trained people that have just got a fascination for the subject. So yes, we have business and professionals, and then we have some private individuals that just want to have a better understanding of themselves and others for personal reasons as well. So we have a broad range of clients. But, yeah.
Okay. And I understand one of the tools that you use is this idea of micro expressions. Mm-hmm. So tell us a bit more about how all that works.
Okay, so micro expressions, for those people that aren't familiar with them, is a term that Paul Ekman talks about. And our training, we have a subsidiary company called Paul Ekman International, where we run emotional skills courses and evaluating truthfulness courses. And part of the science behind that is 40 years of research that Paul Ekman has developed. And micro expressions came from his work into emotions and the universality of emotional expressions. So Darwin was the first person to say that emotions were universal. Wherever you went in the world, you would have the same facial expression for happiness, sadness, disgust, anger, fear, contempt. And that was very much poo-pooed by the scientific field, by the community at the time, until Ekman did a lot of his research into congenitally blind athletes, for example, that show the same look of sadness on their face when they lose and the same face of elation when they win, although they've never seen another face, so it can't be socially learned. And then also the work with the 4A tribe in Papua New Guinea. So Paul Ekman went to Papua New Guinea to see the 4A tribe in the 60s, and these tribes had never seen anyone from the West civilization, no access to TV or anything like that. It was the first time they'd seen video cameras and cameras in general. So they did experiments with them, and sure enough, they showed exactly the same facial expressions as did Westerners, Americans and Japanese and English. So we had this universality of emotional expression. Now, those emotional expressions generally are quite macro. So in most conversations, such as the one we're having now, I'm smiling to you as we're talking and you're smiling back, kind of this feedback that we give, I smile and you smile back, and we see this a lot. And in sometimes deceptive communications, or perhaps where somebody has a genuine reason to hide their emotion, those emotional expressions are dampened down or hidden or suppressed or repressed. And you will only see a flicker of the emotion because we can't be quick enough to stop the emotional expression on our face because it's an automatic part of our system. When we feel emotional, it appears on our face, we have no control. But if we try and squash it, we can't be quick enough. So it will leak in a very, very quick flash, and then we can hide it. But if you're quick enough to spot them, then you'll see these micro expressions, which where people are hiding their true feelings.
And is it easy to spot? You were talking about in normal conversation, there's this reciprocity, but when someone is trying to hide their emotions for whatever reason, mm-hmm. Is it easy for someone else to spot that? Are we aware of it, or is it just a kind of feeling of unease, or how does it manifest itself?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing because when people have micro expressions, most people don't see them consciously, but a lot of us have a gut reaction to somebody, or we have a strange feeling. As you said, it's kind of this gut instinct that there's something wrong with the situation, and that could be that you're picking up on these facial expressions, but you don't know you're picking up on them. And what we do is help people to see those micro expressions. And there's Paul Ekman's tool, the micro expression training tool, that's available on the website. And just an hour on that tool can increase somebody's ability to spot those micro expressions. And once you do that, life becomes quite different because you start to see these facial expressions in a lot of places. Sometimes they're interesting, sometimes they're pleasant, and sometimes they're in situations where you would rather not see them. So.
Okay, so it's a bit like Pandora's box. You're perhaps revealing something that you might rather not know. So,
yeah.
You mentioned earlier that people sometimes have a very good reason for trying to suppress an emotion. Mm-hmm. and it may not necessarily be in order to deceive someone for bad purposes.
Okay.
So how does that work? You know, if you're perhaps trying to protect someone from bad news or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time, day to day. I mean, I'm sure anyone watching this video could think of a time when they've felt quite bad, they've had a bad day, they've just had an argument with their partner or something, and they've gone to work and somebody says, you know, how are you today? And you put on a big, you know, smile on your face and say you're fine, when in fact inside you're feeling quite bad. And it's important for normal relationships for that to stay the case. You know, if you see somebody, a loved one that seems upset, but they're trying to hide it, then it's not really your place to, you know, point at them and say, actually, no, you're sad. I can tell that because I've just seen your micro expression. That's not a good way to build a constructive relationship, because we all have our baggage. We all have things going on inside us. If we want you to know, then we can share that, and it will be very overt. But a lot of the time, those things are beneath the surface, and we keep them inside. But in an HR situation, yeah, an HR practitioner needs their staff to know that they're available. So if an HR practitioner saw a micro expression of sadness on an employee's face, they could simply say, if you ever do need to talk, then you know where I am, just so that they've acknowledged that there's something there, and open the door. But they're not going to point at them and say, well, you need to come into my office because you're obviously sad.
Yeah. So, so in other areas of business, you mentioned sales, for example. So if someone wanted to deliberately try and deceive someone, you know, saying this is the best deal ever and you'll never get a better deal and this is a perfect fit for your needs and all that kind of thing, is it possible for them to become more skilled at lying or deception because they know about these things?
Yeah, there is. I mean, it's and those people that tend to be deceivers tend to be some of the best at spotting it as well, because they live in that world. So there was research done on the ability of the average person to spot deception, and it works out about 54% accuracy of truth and lies is the average. So we may as well just toss a coin of the untrained person. Even some trained people, including the police, it's toss a coin around about 54%. But people like criminals came out at the top because they live in a world full of deception. With salespeople, yeah, I mean, you can hide. I'm not tarnishing the whole sales.
I was just going to say, I'm going to get in terrible trouble here, and I should put a disclaimer out saying, you know, I'm not choosing salespeople deliberately as an example of people who deliberately lie.
Sales, we're all involved in sales. But yeah, with anybody that wants to deceive anybody, then there is the words that we can use, there is the facial expression that we can use, there is the tone of our voice, the style of how we speak as well, and our body language, and our autonomic nervous system. There are several different channels that we're communicating with, and if we try and be deceptive with one or more of those channels, we can't control all of them at the same time. So there'll be what we call leakage in other areas of that communication. So if somebody's trying to keep a smile on their face, then they'll sound sad or angry in their voice. If they're trying to control their voice and their words, they'll flash a micro expression. So it's there's the more you try and squash, the more it will leak up somewhere else.
Okay. And what about you know, the real con artists? Are these people who convince themselves of something, so they actually believe what they're saying, and that's why they're so convincing? Are they less likely to leak the micro expressions than anyone else?
So other aspects of the reason why you might not show too much, you may not, you know, flush in your face, or you may not claim your hands, or your heart rate may not speed up when you're lying, is because you've been successful in lying in the past. So if a con artist has, you know, done, you know, a very good job at conning people in the past, they'll feel a lot less fear. So because of that, you won't see any leakage of fear. Your average person that's trying to get through customs, for example, with a suitcase full of drugs is probably going to flash fear all over their face. But if a smuggler did the same thing several times and got away with it, the amount of fear that they might show would be less and less each time. So it very much depends on previous success or previous failure. You go the other way around as well.
Okay. And does your academy ever teach people how to be more successful at deception?
No, we've not done that. There's obviously an ethical issue with that. I mean, there is some cases where there are sectors where people do need to know to be deceptive. In the Secret Service, for example, their jobs rely on being deceptive in order to keep undercover. Undercover police officers. Deception is a big part of their lives, but that's not something that we teach at Emotional Intelligence Academy. It's emotional awareness and evaluating truthfulness and credibility, which are the key areas of Paul Ekman's science. And it really is that emphasis on evaluating truthfulness and credibility rather than detecting deception, because most of us would like to believe that the world is 98% good, even if that's a complete falsification. But trying to see the truth, and in the absence of truthfulness and credibility, then one possibility is that somebody's lying to us. But we try and see truthfulness wherever possible. So
that's a general human trait, is it?
No, it's not a general human trait. It's one that I personally like to have.
Okay.
But some people are very pessimistic. Some people are very cynical and believe that everybody's lying. And then some people are very naive and believe that everybody is telling the truth. We come from the point of view of trying to evaluate truthfulness and credibility is a better place to come from, especially in policing, for example. If you're looking for guilt, you'll find guilt. So it's trying to make sure that you are covering all the bases and not just going into trying to find a lie, because if you look at signs of lies, you'll see signs of lies.
Okay, so there's no correlation between people's general outlook and the way they see the world, the way they view people in general, and their ability to detect true deception.
No, there's no research on the correlation between those things. But what we try and stay away from is looking for deception, because if you look for deception, or if you look for a lot of the books out there will tell you this, scratching the nose or things is signs of deception. And those myths, if you look for them, you'll see them. You'll see people getting anxious. You'll see people struggling. You'll see people sweating in an interview. And if you think that that's deceptive, then you're going to be going off the wrong track. So we try and look for truthfulness and credibility. So what about this person's behaviour tells me they're being truthful and credible? If there's very little evidence of truthfulness or credibility, then we would then start to consider, well, maybe there's deception here, or there could be other reasons. They could be on prescription medication, or just generally anxious about the situation they're in. So.
Yeah. Okay. So just going back to the micro expressions, you mentioned the universal expressions, and so is it always a variation on that will give someone away? That it's a universal expression like happiness that they're trying to put across, but then something else will creep in.
Yeah. So with micro expressions, there are 7 universal micro expressions. We have happy, sad, anger, disgust, fear, surprise, and contempt. And they're the 7 universals. And there are several themes underneath that. So if somebody is in deep despair, it's obvious when they're sad, because it will show on their face, and they'll probably be crying. If somebody is trying to hide it, we may just see a small flicker of the eyebrows, like this, the inner corner of the eyebrows, perhaps. Which would show us there's some sadness. Now, somebody could have a happy face. Someone could be smiling and then still have the eyebrows, so they can be trying to cover it, but then the eyebrows would would tell a different story.
Oh my goodness, that's extraordinary. Just seeing it on your face there is just that's so powerful. You don't realise how quickly you pick these up.
Indeed, yeah, and it's one of the most enduring of the emotions as well. Sadness. So if we see sadness, it's a cry for help, and it's one of those emotions that we've had on our faces that helps bring communities together. So if somebody's in trouble, then we know that because of the expression on their face. So if we show sadness, you may get a feeling if you didn't know what you were looking for, but it only takes a very tiny movement of the inner corner of the eyebrow to notice someone's sad there. And again, with fear or with anger, in meetings, for example, if you're having a meeting with the board in a business setting, and somebody is giving what they think is a wonderful idea, and everybody seems to agree, and yet you see some tight lips around the room, it could be that they're suppressing anger. So we may see part of an expression leaking out, not necessarily the whole expression.
So turning that on its head, and just seeing how you've demonstrated those expressions there, is this a technique that actors use? Can they obviously understand how to get these emotions across? And I heard someone discussing the other day about animated films and why they have an even bigger impact. And is that because the animators have taken those expressions and exaggerated them?
Yeah, I mean, to use Pixar as an example, I started off in this area because I was a certified fax coder, which is somebody that codes faces into numbers, a very nerdy thing to do. But when you see a facial expression, it can be coded for scientific research. And I'm a certified facial action coder, and they use facial action coding system, or fax for short, in animation studios also, to make sure that they have the correct emotional expressions for the characters they're now using. And never used to, but they do now, and Dr. Ekman has worked with animation studios in the past as well to get those expressions right, and they do have a big impact. And you can connect more to the characters because they have the universal expressions of emotion on the face there. And actors, yes, it's something that we've done a couple of times, worked with actors to get the emotional expressions on the face. I think subtlety is the key with acting, because we can all do the big macro expressions and show fear on our faces, but it's taking that and then reining it back in for acting is a lot better.
Well, they do say that's the difference between stage acting and film acting, don't they? Because the film obviously does pick up those very micro expressions, whereas on the stage with the audience a long way away, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. So let's just wrap this up by talking in particular about people in small business. Someone who is, every day they're dealing with suppliers, with members of staff, perhaps doing some selling. So what do you think is the most useful thing that they can learn from this?
I think learning your own emotional response is one good thing. So keeping a check of the things that make you emotional, understanding when you're being emotional, how that affects your life, but really being able to understand what's going on for the person in front of you is hugely important. Obviously, from a deceptive point of view, that's important to make sure that you're not being deceived in business. But to make sure you can build solid relationships either within the organization you work in or with customers. Just understanding that you're not rubbing somebody up the wrong way with your sales pitch, they're not getting annoyed with the way that you're handling them, or just to know when to stop and change tack. So understanding what's going on for the person in front of me, what's going on for me. Is this part of a positive, constructive relationship that we're building here from a business point of view with an employee or a manager? And that can really help move things forward to build these constructive relationships in business. Many people do it very, very well without training, but it's useful to have the training there for people that want to learn it and learn more about how they can help themselves and help other people by understanding them more.
Okay. And what about the situation where perhaps you get a gut instinct, which we touched on this earlier, but there's an awful lot of people who've been very, very successful in business say they always go on their instinct. They trust their gut instincts. So again, is that something that people can learn to do? That they can build that trust, or do they really need to refer back to what made them feel like that and try and analyse it a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I think you don't want to get too reductionist. So yeah, it's very easy to sort of analyse that right back. And I think the gut is one of those things where we are hardwired to accept this information. We already are. So micro-expressions, changes in the tone of voice, certain words that people use, and you will have those gut reactions. When we've had people on trains before and they say, "Oh, I just go on my gut, I go on my gut." Sometimes they're wrong in training. And so, okay, well, we need to work out what's working for you with your gut and what isn't working for you. We're really kind of breaking it down, separating out the channels of communication from the face, the voice, the body, the words, and the verbal style, and then pulling it back together again, and then bringing the gut back in again. So it's about practicing, getting better at understanding the different channels that people communicate to us with, and then practicing that enough that becomes unconscious, and then we can then rely back on our gut again, because we have some good grounding in what our gut is referring to.
Yeah, yeah. I can remember when neuro-linguistic programming first came in. It was very popular. You get an awful lot of people watching the way your eyes were moving in order to try and figure out whether you're telling the truth or not. And that just seemed so crazy. As you say, most people pick that kind of thing up instinctively anyway.
Yeah. I think with eye accessing cues, it's one of the things that we try and do is kind of get the myths of deception detection and kind of burst them a bit. And eye accessing cues and NLP is one of those myths. People move their eyes in different directions for various different reasons. And even if they are constructing, it doesn't mean they're lying. It could be they're constructing something to make sense of the sentence you just said. So it's it's one myth we come across on pretty much every course we run. So
yeah, I'm sure.
Someone will
Okay. Aaron, that has been absolutely fascinating. What I'll do is put your website, your Twitter, your Facebook details on the video, on the YouTube information, so that people can come along and have a look at what you do. Is there anything in particular on the website that you think would be a useful starting point for someone who's just generally interested in this kind of thing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if they're interested in the micro-expressions, as I said, the micro-expression training tool, you can get access to that on the website. So that's a very good place to start. It was developed by Paul Ekman, Dr. Ekman, many years ago, and it's been used very successfully since then. It's recently been updated, so that's probably the best place to start if you want to understand facial expressions, is go for the micro-expression training tool.
Okay. And do you have... Okay. Do you have a blog, or are there books that you can recommend? Or
there is a blog on the Emotional Intelligence Academy website. So if you go on there, there's a blog on that website, and there's also a page for research as well. If you're interested in the more academic side and you want to see the research for where this came from and new research as we put it up, that's the place to go. And then you'll see a lot of stuff about this research amongst others as well. So.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you very, very much for joining us today. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you again. I'm sure we'll be getting lots of feedback and lots of reactions and all kinds of questions coming through, and I'll feed people your way, and perhaps they'll leave them on the YouTube video or on Google Plus or something like that. But I'm sure the conversation won't stop here. But thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.